I don't think it's fair to say, because you keep going back to the point of like, once you grow up, you'll get it.
And that's very condescending of me. I'm sorry.
It is. And I think it's not fair to say that young people haven't seen stuff either. I'm saying, like, I think it's unfair to automatically assume that a whole generation is ignorant or is naive or is not smart enough to know.
Then I feel like I'm talking to somebody I can't take serious 100% because they're playing a game, you know? At least they want me to play the game, you know?
But how do you see it as a game?
This thing of your generation has become more of a feel of control for everybody else. That's what it feels like. But I thought we said that pride, it was a bad thing. You know, and that's where we go back to it. We've always said that pride is a bad thing.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not about me forcing you to treat me a certain way. It's about, like I said, like when you're treating your kids, right? Like.
So what's up, guys? Louis here, back again with another podcast. Today we have another guest. Her name is Ana Karen Garro. And we're going to talk a little bit about another different perspective. She's a 21-year-old film student, and she's aspiring to also, you know, go into the film industry. And so I always like different perspectives depending on your age, your background, and we want to keep welcoming guests who have a different idea and are also coming up, you know, in the world. So I want to go ahead and introduce you. How you doing, Ana?
I'm good, thank you. I'm actually 20.
20, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
20, even better, you know, you have more time. So.
Not yet, but I'm good, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me today. And yeah, I think exactly what you said. I think having a different perspective is always important. So I'm ready to talk about, you know, anything.
So to kind of give yourself a little bit of an introduction to the audience, what exactly are you doing right now with your life?
So right now I'm a full-time student. I'm also interning in 2 different places, so it's been very busy. I'm studying film, and right now I'm in MDC Honors, which is a program where for 2 years you study in MDC and then you transfer, and you know they pay for your tuition the first 2 years, so it's great, and they have a lot of opportunities. So I've been there for the past 2 years, and then now I'm going to transfer to a college in Chicago. I'm not sure exactly where yet. Either Columbia College, Chicago, or DePaul University for film. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, right now I'm just figuring out, you know, where my role is in the film industry. I like cinematography so far because I'm also a freelance photographer and videographer, so I am very familiar with the camera.
Okay.
But obviously there's a lot to learn still, like, you know, all the big cameras, I haven't experimented as much with them yet. I'm also interested in directing, screenwriting.
So she wants to do it all, literally. Yeah. Anything that has to do with movies or photography or film. Yeah. That's literally what you want to do. You know, let's also talk about a little bit about your background, obviously. You know, when I send my interviewers or my interviewees, like a list of questions and topics we want to talk about, you know, one of the things that I noticed, you know, is that you have a similar, you know, background to me and any immigrant, which is you're not from here, you're from Mexico, correct? Yeah. Were you born in Mexico?
I was born in Mexico. I lived there until 2011. So 8 years of my life, and I go back every year. So I'm very still familiar with the culture. We speak Spanish.
And you're a citizen here in the U.S.?
Yeah, just became like a citizen 2 years ago. And then I lived in Chicago for 6 years. And I'm, you know, now going back, but I've lived in Miami for the past 7 years. So I've been, you know, in 3 different
Miami
cities.
Just gets more and more cultural. I say this every time. You know, we're literally like the Mecca for, you know, Hispanic culture here in the U.S.
Yeah, for sure.
So how does it feel, you know, because I think as immigrants, we all go through this where we come to a new country, you know, you have to start over. And, you know, how exactly did you deal with that? Do you think there's a stigma to it? And do you think it's something we should help out, or it's just part of the process and being welcome into a new thing?
I mean, I was 8 when I first moved. So I think it's a different experience than a lot of other people. I think that, I mean, I know a lot of people in Miami that also moved around that same time, specifically from Venezuela, from Colombia, because, you know, the political situation around that time was very bad. So, and I think, Cuba. Yeah, Cuba too.
No, thanks to Cuba, Venezuela got screwed. I would say.
But even in Cuba, I know a lot of people that moved around that specific time period, like the early 2010s. And I've noticed that we all share the same traumas, if you will, like the same experiences of moving to a new country and, going through that whole process of you don't understand exactly what's going on, but you know that you're leaving everything behind and you have to learn a new language. And yeah, like you mentioned, like there is stuff that we can do to help, but at the same time, it's part of the process. I think that at least for me, I moved to Chicago at first, not to Miami. If I had moved to Miami, it would have been a little bit easier just because people speak Spanish here.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to a lot of places here, speak English, and they'll be like, "¿Qué?"
Yeah, exactly. So I think if I moved here, it would have been a little bit easier, the process. But in Chicago, even though there's a lot of Mexicans, not a lot of them speak Spanish.
I didn't know there was a lot of Mexicans in Chicago.
There's a lot.
Really?
Yeah. Which I love about Chicago, but not a lot of them speak Spanish or fluent as well.
So it's more like an older wave
It's
of
a Chicano
Mexicans.
culture.
Yeah.
So it's, people whose parents or grandparents have lived in Mexico or, they go back every like once in a while, but they're not as familiar with the language or culture, at least like where I lived. I mean, closer to downtown, there's a lot of Mexicans and that speak Spanish, but I lived in a suburb. So, that puts you very separate from all that. And I remember like when I first moved, I got put into ESOL, which is, like
I was there for a month, and then my parents refused to leave me there. So I learned English real quick.
And that's the thing. For me, I was there, but I was with a kid who also knew English completely. Like he was just there because his family's descent is Mexican. The teacher didn't speak Spanish. So there was not really any purpose for me to be there. They didn't really teach me English. It was just kind of like, we have to because of the government, you know? But there was no teacher there that was able to speak with me or like explain to me what was going on. One of my teachers, she made like a vocabulary book for me, which I really appreciated. But I don't think that there was enough help at that time for someone who just came into a new country. But at the same time, it's not necessarily the responsibility. So it's just, I mean, as a kid,
it's tough though because again, we are this country that allows, especially right now. I mean, you would say more people are coming to this country right now than ever, right? So if we are welcoming these people in, at the same time, like, how do we set them up to succeed if there's not some kind of system, where it actually speaks their language, translates for them? And I have the same sentiment. When I did get to ESO, it felt more just like, all right, guys, you gotta get the hell out of here, Like, hurry up, learn this stuff.
Yeah. And then also, another thing about being like, little and going into a completely different school, completely different system, everything, I didn't understand anything that was going on around me. So it was very scary at first. I remember like I would come home crying. That's like the only thing I remember.
Is the U.S. society for you, much different than Mexico at this point?
Yes, 100%. It's very, very different.
In what sense?
Mexico society is more friendly, I'd say. And the school system is different. So in Mexico...
Did you go to public or private school?
A private school.
Okay.
In Mexico, here I went to public. But they have smaller classes. So you're with the same people for years, or at least like a year. Like you don't take advanced classes. You don't take different classes depending on your intelligence level. But here they separate you already, which is what I was going to say. I took a test maybe 2 months into moving here. They were like, oh, you're smart. Okay, we're moving you into another class. So instantly I was separated from a lot of people. And, I was still able to interact with them, but there is this like, separation of types of people. And
do you think that's just because of the type of society we live in? I mean,
yeah, but then this creates
a capitalist society in the sense of
like a separation growing up, because then in high school it's the same thing. Like the AP kids stay with the AP kids, and like the classes that are like for the regular students, they never interact. And so when I graduated, I never...
That's what they usually say. Your high school friends won't be your real friends.
Yeah, but in Mexico, it's not like that. In Mexico, like everybody knows each other.
I think it's also a representation of the Hispanic community, though. Yeah. I'll say this like this. Like, even Cuba or Venezuela or any other Hispanic community, you tend to be able to grow up with, with your people no matter what. Like, you kind of stay where you're at. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the U.S., which is what you're saying, you really go where you can do best at.
It's very individualistic, which again is a good thing if you're thinking about it in like a capitalistic way, but
Not even capitalistic. I think a lot of people like confuse capitalism with like just whoever can do it better will dominate everybody else. It's also like a liberal sense,
yeah.
you know, in the sense of like, all right, so if I'm better than you, that means I have to be punished because you're worse than me. And so that's where I'm it's always like a weird line between being, okay, we don't want somebody to oppress everybody else because they're good at manipulating or cheating the system, you know, but at the same time, we don't want the really talented people, you know, who clearly show out every single time and they keep trying to think there's a cap, and now they won't try harder anymore.
And that's another thing. I think you're also sacrificing certain things, right? So in the US, we have a lot more room to grow, which is why a lot of people move here. It's, you know, the quote unquote American dream. And I think that's a good thing. You know, I don't think I could be where I am right now if I hadn't moved here. All the opportunities I've gotten, I'm very grateful for that. And I acknowledge that it's a really big privilege. But at the same time, you're sacrificing that culture and that bond of,
I agree,
you know, being with people who have the same morals as you, who have the same views as you, who, it's a different thing. And like I said, I go back every year and I have a best friend there who every time she's graduated, I've been there. So I hang out with her friends. I see how it would have been to, live in Mexico, and it's just so different. And I think they're just so much closer, the bond. Like she knew everybody in her graduating class. In mine, I could tell you the names of maybe half of them, but there's a point where that interaction and that community gets lost, and you're just sacrificing that for your own growth, which it's a personal thing, it's good and bad, but it is something that is have to acknowledge.
One of the topics that you kind of wanted to also touch on was being a third culture kid.
Mm-hmm.
And, I want you to explain first what that means to you. So then I can give you what I think too, because I've been around.
Are you familiar
all over the world.
with the term?
I'm not, but I have an idea
okay.
of what it means. So I'd rather let you define what you think it is first.
So I've researched a lot on it in high school. I did a research project on it because I found this term and I instantly knew that's what I identified with, because I've never felt able to say I'm one from one place or the other. I've grew up in Mexico.
It kind of it feels like the pronoun thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I don't know what to identify as, but
yeah, I've grown up in Mexico, and I do consider myself Mexican, but at the same time I've also lived more than half my life here. So it's, I don't feel like it's fair to say I'm just from one place. So when I found this term, which basically means that the actual definition is if you're a kid from 8 to 12 who's moved to a different place than what your parents' culture is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have your parents' culture, you have the culture where you live in now, and the culture that's kind of in the middle, right? So, and that only applies if you've lived in a certain place for a certain amount of time, if that makes sense. Because then there's sub-genres into that.
What would you call somebody who's lived South Africa for 2 years, Las Vegas for 3 almost, and then New York for another 3.
So it depends how old
and
you
Cuba,
were.
almost 8.
So
that's why I found it interesting. I left Cuba almost at 8, literally 7 years and 20 days to my birthday.
Yeah, so
I lived in Africa for almost 2, in South Africa.
Okay.
Then we escaped for 5 months all around the world. And then we lived in Las Vegas for 2.5 when we came here. And then we lived in New York for 3 more. And then I've been here in Miami now almost 18 this year.
Yeah, so you're definitely a third culture kid.
Okay.
I'd say
the funny thing is I don't feel that way. And
I think you should look into it, because it also has a lot of, like I said, subcategories and technicalities and stuff. But the way that I interpret it is just the closest thing to an identity that I've felt. Because the reason why I was saying depends how old you are is because it depends on your formative years. So from 1 to 8, you change a lot, right? That's how you've been raised, and they're called formative years for a reason. I think it's from 1 to 6 or 1 to 7, something like that. So if you moved when you were 2 years old, that's different. You didn't experience as much of the culture.
It happened to my brother.
Yeah, you weren't as immersed, I guess. But by 8 years old, even though you're still really little, you have picked up a lot of things, like it's 8 years of your life and the first 8 years of your life. It's not when you were 16 that you moved and you lived somewhere else for 8 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
And so that's why, like I said, like it depends how old you were for you to be considered a third culture kid. And for me, it's just, yeah, like I lived in Chicago. I always say this. I was born in Mexico and was raised there. I grew up in Chicago and now I live here and I've lived here for like my teenage years, right? And every phase of that has changed me in a different way.
Oh, without a doubt. I also think it's also your age, where at your age in particular, and I can attest to this, I've been there literally 10, 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything's changing so fast, and for the most part, you don't have control other than that what the system is programmed for you. You have no choice but to go through these steps.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a student, you have to get through these steps, So I think once you leave those steps, you'll really be able to identify better who you are, because everything else doesn't matter. Once you follow the system, it's up to you whether you're good, bad, successful or not. So, but I'm really curious about the identity issue for people your age. Because, man, I'll be honest with you, when I went through college in 2009, that's when I started college, like we didn't care about any of this stuff. It was really more about partying and people who actually wanted to get stuff done, and those would be the students who actually, make a difference. I was supposed to be the dropout that didn't get shit done, until given an opportunity. And I think that's really when I found who I am, if I focus on this, I'll get it done no matter what it is. But what we're seeing with like teenagers nowadays, I feel like they're confused. They don't know, apart from they don't know what you're going to do with your life. No teenager really should at 15, unless you're being like force fed something, now you're also questioning what your identity is with sex, roles, how do you relate in that environment? What's going on? It's really what I want to know.
Well, first of all, I wanted to ask this first. How do you identify, like, as culture-wise? Like, when people ask where are you from, do you say I'm from Miami and that's it? Or do you explain your whole...
No, I usually say I'm from Miami, from the US. Yeah.
I was just curious. But going back to your question, I think that...
I think for transparency, I usually have to say that I'm Cuban, I'm Hispanic, because
Right.
everybody assumes right away I'm like white American. I mean, just from my hairdo, I don't really have an accent. I got bullied into losing my accent. That's why like every immigrant goes through that. So I don't play that game. I just kind of like, for me, it's just let me be me. I'll let you be you, That's it.
And I think going off that, that's just... I don't think that it's a new thing that people are feeling. I think it's a new thing that people are talking about more than anything. Because I think as humans, we're just meant to belong. And when we don't feel that way, we question it. Like, why don't we? Where am I? Like this goes back to forever. I don't think that it's like a new thing that we're searching for identity.
I mean, I went through, in high school alone, a goth phase.
Exactly.
A sport phase. A depressed phase, it's just like you go through these. That's what I'm saying. At that age, you don't really know.
Exactly.
And why I'm so curious, why, I do agree, younger people want that feeling of identifying with something, believing something that they're actually a part of makes something happen. Because at that point, you just feel like I'm useless. Nothing happens. But now, with that being said, do you think that can also be manipulated and used against people who are just looking for belonging rather than analyzing the consequences of just following blindly?
I think that, yes, it can be easy to manipulate teenagers because we're vulnerable, in a sense, to new information and things happening. But that's not to say that teenagers can't also already know their identity or have like been figuring it out for a while. And I think that argument, though, you're right. Like, I think it's easy to manipulate. I don't think that it should also, because I've heard a lot of people use it to invalidate then these identities that people find, like if someone says like, I don't know, I think I feel this way. Like
no, I mean, we can talk about it here freely. It's not, I rather always speak straight and clearly, because that way we can be more transparent and steer the conversation easier. I feel like when we use, and this is part of the problem I see on both sides, when we try to be broad to not damage or kind of rub shoulders on anybody, we also create this vacuum of leaving things that need to be said unsaid. And when that happens, you get ambiguity. With more ambiguity, people start getting pissed off on both sides. So I like to go straight forward. So, one of the things that I think you're alluding to is just like I was talking about the pronoun game. So if somebody tells me, for example, I identify as a woman and I am a man, but starting today, this is how I feel. For me personally, it's very, very hard to be able to do that unless I've seen this person do this without a flaw. And I'll give you an example. So one of my uncles is gay. Like gay. Like he has a partner he's been with forever, they hold hands, they kiss, they have a matrimony, all 9 yards, right? My mom, and she's always said it, from little, I could tell this man was gay. He wanted to play, and since he was growing up in Cuba, they would punish him for it, They would beat him, they would hit him, they would ostracize him, which of course that's wrong. But in societies where, even in Mexico, where you don't have this accepting of, or at least alluding to be very tolerant, you get these bubbles where this is it. So, but like going back to my point, from little, this guy's gay. There's no question about it. No matter how much you try and convert him, force him, this guy's gay. The problem we have in society, at least I think from my point of view, my generation, right, compared to yours, what are you guys, Gen Z? What am I, a millennial?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Is that how can you just today start saying I'm a woman without me having actual validation? How do I believe you, when you could be a liar? Guess what? People lie, and going back to the example, how can you say somebody's not gay if they've been gay since they're freaking a little child? So it just feels like more of you trying to trick me and tell me how I should, act around you than you being sincere. We all know the gay kid in the class. We all know the lesbians in the class since we've been little, but we also know that Billy was a fucker, and this guy can be that guy in the future, and there's genuinely bad people. So how can I respect you if I don't think you're real?
Well, and this is what I was saying. Like, I think a lot of the times it's easy to invalidate people's identity. Like if someone says, I'm a they, them, right? It also depends how much you know them, how much you get to judge them, right? Like, I don't think that if you first meet a stranger and they tell you, hey, can you please call me with these pronouns, and you choose to actively disrespect that, I think that that's on you. And because how does that affect you? You know what I mean? Like,
well, because again, we go back to the cynical thing. And that's why I love this discussion, because I see you and your generation doing this from a point of love and a good, innocent heart. That's what I'm saying when I said in the beginning. I don't think this whole pronoun game, this whole identity game comes from a bad place. You guys come from a pure heart. I've been there just 10 years ago. But once you leave that little bubble, and that's what I'm saying, and you actually have to grind and work and be good at what you really want to become, you end up noticing there's a lot of bad people in this world. Give me a second. I'm finishing my point, okay? And that's where the cynic comes in and says, I get that, but you also creating, an unfairness for me where now I have to bow down to anybody's, thinking or sensibility. It can't be that way. It always needs to be a balance, So that's why I think it's one of those things until both sides say, you know what, who cares? If you want to respect me, whatever. If not, then we'll all be together, because there really won't be. It's like you can never force a human to do something, especially in a country like this. We all think we have a right to do what we need to do. So that lies the problem. You think I'm disrespecting you for not addressing you like that. I think you're disrespecting me for forcing me to say that. It's like if I wanted you to call me big dick, those are my pronouns. That's disrespectful. That's not nice. I'm clearly mocking you. And at the same time, I'm applying your principles and your rules. So I think the best way, and I learned this just from dealing with my brother. My brother is a completely different personality than me. He's much more strict. whenever I would want him to do things my way, it would never work. We would end up fighting. The day I decided to say, you know what, I love you no matter what. And if you show up or not, I'm going to love you regardless. That's the day we stopped having problems. We saw eye to eye. Because it no longer became a position about controlling each other as much. You know what? If we get a chance to hang out, that was such an amazing opportunity. Other than that, we don't need to hang out. You know? And I feel like that's the divide. Mm-hmm. Is that any accurate? Do you want to say something? Louis, you're full of shit. Like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's fair to say, because you keep going back to the point of like, once you grow up, you'll get it.
And that's very condescending of me. I'm sorry. It
is. And I think it's not fair to say that young people haven't seen stuff either.
It's also true, though. They say the devil knows not because he's the devil, it's because how long he's lived. I don't know how that, it's something like that, where it's like, that's why people, in my opinion, and any living being, we need an expiration date. You become really cynical and really like inundated with like, well, I don't trust this thing, I don't trust this person, the more you live. Because it's just, te han pasado tantas cosas. So many things have happened to you, where you become more distrustful. And so, one aspect, we don't want to dismiss you because you're intelligent. You guys obviously want to bring something. You're the new generation. You have something to prove. Great, do it. But at the same time, we want to make sure you're not naive enough to fall for the same tricks every other person has fallen generation after generation after generation after generation. And as a father now, I finally say it's like, fuck, I was dumb. I didn't listen, But it's going to happen anyways.
It is going to happen anyways. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think it's unfair to automatically assume that a whole generation is ignorant or is naive or is not smart enough to know the difference.
I didn't say that. I said every generation is naive, ignorant.
Okay, every generation. To generalize a generation.
Including me.
Yes.
All right.
I don't think it's fair to generalize a generation, because then you're automatically assuming somebody's life, somebody's experience. I personally think, and I feel very strongly about this, I don't treat people based on their age. I don't treat people based on their status. I treat them as people, no matter if they're 5 years old or if they're 10 years old. It's how you are as a person, right? If you are a professor who's disrespecting me, I'm not going to, be like you said, like
disrespecting you in what sense?
If you yell at me, if you do something that just any human should not do to one another, just like a socially accepted thing, I am not going to just say, yes, sir, yes, sir. I don't think that that's a good thing. And I think it goes the same way. If an adult is treating a kid, not a kid, but like a teenager, right? And we're also being disrespectful, I don't think it's a good thing to just be like, oh, okay, you're a kid, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you need to have a conversation.
No, I agree. I agree
right.
with that 100%.
And it's the same thing. It's like, I think communication is just the best way to go. Like, I'm not going to yell back. I'm just going to say, I don't feel like you're respecting me. Please, respect me. Like, can we have a normal conversation like a normal human being? And I think that goes the same way for both ways. Like, an adult cannot assume something of a child or of a teenager without having a conversation with them first, without getting to know them first and knowing where they come from. And so going back to the pronouns thing, how do you know when you first meet somebody that they're not already, like, that they haven't gone through a self journey to get to where they are, right? Like, that they already haven't gone through a bunch of stuff, that they already haven't seen all of the bad things that you're talking about to get to the point where they are. You're just assuming that they don't know what they're talking about. And
no, I'll be honest with you, because even then, and the pitch you just made is so beautiful, in a sense of respecting, getting to really acknowledge people for what they're telling you, because that's how we should be. I agree with that. But I'm also saying, a lot of people, especially adults, don't change from one day to another unless they have really, 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 really thought this out.
And that's true.
You know? And so that's wherein lies the problem. And it kind of expands. You know, the pronoun thing, I think really what it bothers people about is that it feels like a slippery slope. In the sense of, all right, so now you don't want me to call you this. It started as she, he, whatever. There's like a million now. You know, and now it becomes more like, well, like, can we just have like a regular conversation? You know, I'd rather not even at this point, if somebody said, oh, I'm a they, I'm just going to call you by your name, bro. I'm not going to play that game. Like,
and see, that
can we just have a real conversation?
It's already being respectful. Like, if you just call them by their name.
But that's not really respectful, because then I feel like I'm talking to somebody I can't take serious 100% because they're playing a game. You know, at least they want me to play the game. You know,
but how do you see it as a game?
I see it as a game because why are we so focused on this and not like what really matters in life? You know, coming from impoverished countries, coming from places where we know it can be a lot worse, I feel like that really takes away from what we should be talking about. You know, actual problems, you know, like people who are hungry, you know, murder, crime, like these are actual problems that are taking people's lives, as opposed to these are problems which are more psychological and mental. I feel at least as my perspective that when we're talking about stuff that's about my feelings and stuff, we've gotten to a point where we have it so good that now we're literally talking about not stepping on each other's toes, as opposed to when we're talking about countries from Mexico, Cuba, Venezuela, Korea, you know, Africa. These people don't have these problems because they're literally starving. They're dying. You know, they're literally working for freedom.
Right.
And so you know why they don't have these issues? Because I can tell you to your face something that in those countries would be seen as something endearing. And over here, it's just like disgusting. You know, because that's why I feel when a society has it to the point where, you know, trying to not step on each other's toes very lightly, and it's an insult, I feel like we haven't made. We literally haven't made to the point where now we also have to like respect people's feelings as to what they should be thinking about. It shouldn't be like that. And that's just my opinion.
See, you made like a few points there, which some I agree. And then there's one that I want to talk about. So I agree with the fact that, yes, it's gotten to a point where there's people who are very sensitive to the point where you just don't know what to say. And it's happened to me, you know, like there's things about social issues that I don't know how to talk about with people because, like you said, it's scary, like, you know, saying the wrong thing. And I think that that's a bad thing because then you end up not talking about it, right? Like you said. I agree with that point 100%. I also agree with the fact that we get to a point where we're so privileged that we can't have these conversations. And that's something that also needs to be acknowledged because we're talking about gender, we're talking about sexuality. And like you said, in other countries, a podcast is not even a thing, you know, like they don't care about that. But this is another point I want to make. They have those problems also because they don't talk about their feelings a lot of the time. Like machismo, like I don't know how to say it in English, but machismo in Mexico is such a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because people don't talk about their feelings. You know, like if men, specifically men, knew how to talk about their feelings, if women know how to talk about their feelings with men, their relationships would be different. And it's like a domino effect, right? Like I'm not saying that we have to be like the US society and just be like to the extreme where we're you know, we don't know what to talk about, how to talk about it. But that mentality of like, we have other problems to talk about, not feelings, is also how we got there in the first place. Because then machismo leads to feminicide. And, you know, then that affects me.
I think that's everything, though. Whenever you push too hard on one side, you create the other.
But
it's like you're saying the boys coming up right now in your generation are coming up more conservative than ever. And that's because
it's too extreme.
Part of the problem. We want men to act like women so much in the sense of sharing. And that, let's go back before I say that, because I think I'm going to create a problem there. Okay. Do you think, you know, from your point of view, men and women are different innately? Or is that just something where it's like a social thing and we can be anybody we want?
No, I think men and women are different innately in a lot of ways. I think it's out of, you know, what's the word, like survival instincts, I think we're made certain ways, and that's perfectly fine to, again, acknowledge. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your femininity a little bit more developed or your masculinity developed or whatever. And that also doesn't determine your sexuality. It doesn't determine, it just also depends on what you're talking about. Because I think the straight up answer is yes, we're both different, That's from birth, we're different.
But the reason why I asked that question is because we're going back to the same thing where you're saying, men don't share their feelings and women are not good at getting men to share their feeling. And that's why I ask, do you think men and women are different innately? Because to most people in the world, I think, except maybe here in the US, that's without a doubt. Men and women are different. So men tend to be more, I don't want to insult men, but we're more cavemen, from birth, whereas women tend to be more soft. Mm-hmm. We see how they play. They're much more rougher. I'm an example, anecdotal, My boys play a lot more rougher, even though my little girl also plays very rough. Because that's her mom. Her mom, she's more of a tomboy. Mm-hmm. My wife is more of a tomboy, And that's what I'm saying. Like this thing of your generation has become more of a feel of control for everybody else. That's what it feels like. You guys are trying to control how we react to you, as opposed to, I get it. You guys want to be something. Let's be about this. So hopefully within 5 years, you guys will have more of a size of comparison to your life. And then we'll see if this becomes just the norm. Hey, here is George. He is a he-hum. I don't know. I'm just saying that. Or we can go back to just, what, man, if you want to call me he, him, or you want to call me, it's up to you. I don't care. Which that's what I used to feel. I used to be like, you want to call me this and that? Who cares? Why should I care about what you call me? If I know who I am and what I am, what do I care about your opinion about me?
And I see that point. I think that a lot of the times, even not relating to gender or, pronouns or whatever, a lot of the time it is the problem. The problem is caring about people's opinions, right? Like with anything. It's just, if you don't care, then...
If you don't care, then you're confident that you're good.
Exactly. But at the same time, I think it depends what situation you're talking about. Because if it's just in a conversation that, we're meeting one time and I'm asking you to call me pronouns and then I get mad that you're not, I understand in that just sense of then just don't care. Take the person into context and understand whatever, don't care.
And if you have to interact with that person in a professional setting.
Exactly. But then
be professional in that setting.
The other thing is for example, when people get offended when they don't call them doctor, when they have their doctorate's degree, it's then just don't care. Well, but you earned that, you worked for that. Obviously it's different because it's an academic thing, but it goes to the point where it's they've gone through such a big journey of self-discovery and all that.
But I thought we said that pride, it was a bad thing. And that's where we go back to it. We've always said that pride is a bad thing, mm-hmm. right? Being that machismo. Oh, machismo comes from pride. Mm-hmm. I'm a man. I'm proud of being that, and you shut up, right? We're saying pride is bad. Ego is bad. But at the same time, we want to recognize the pride and ego of people that refuse to not, interact with you if you don't address me. I want you to address me from now on as King Louis. And anything else will be an assault to me.
I think it's also different when you're saying a name than, I don't know. I think that...
But that's what I'm saying. I come from family of doctors.
Right.
I personally, whenever I meet a doctor, I call him doctor. Mm-hmm. Just from my interaction, my understanding that these people have worked hard. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to address them with respect. But if I am in the street and and have no interaction with you, I didn't force you to become a doctor. You're calling me, hey, Louis. I'm going to call you, hey, Carl. Why do I have to say, hey, Dr. Carl?
Exactly. I think, like I said, it just depends on the situation that you're in the context of the person. If it's also someone who's in your life consistently, or if it's someone who you're just having a conversation with or professional.
I'm saying, I think in 5 years, the pronoun thing will be gone. Because you guys, your era will just be like, you know what, bro? you don't want to call me this. I'm just not going to interact with you. I don't care.
Yeah, and you'll find people who
I'm
do.
cool with
if
you.
that's what
Exactly.
you
I
want
have
to.
friends who actually respect me for those values. I'm cool with them. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is going to be later when you have to interact with people that don't want to do that, but also have the same values
And I do agree
alignment
with
you.
the fact that we, as a generation, do need to learn to interact with people who don't agree with us, because I think that's a lot of the time a problem of miscommunication. Like, we're trying to get a point across, and because the other person is also trying to get their point across, then there's a misunderstanding, and then it's just two extremes fighting, right? But I think,
and the crazy thing is, like, we're probably going to end up agreeing with 90% of things.
exactly.
But that 5 to 10, right? We focus on it so much that we think it's more 90-10 the other way around. The problem is the biggest thing, and it's actually the least thing. Everything else is aligned. You just can't have peace in the world without, disagreeing with something and at the same time be like, all right, well, I'd rather agree with you and be here in this team for 80% of things and 20% of the things are not good, because otherwise I'm going to get nothing, So it's, one of those things.
I think, like, yeah, it's compromise. It's I think from both generations, understanding when it's worth an argument and when it's not.
And what do you think the next generation is gonna use to reinforce their values?
The next generation is also interesting.
A little crazy.
It's gonna be interesting because they grew up with technology since the beginning. We started when we were.
I wanted to even ask you that as well. I do feel like a lot of these movements have been hyper sped up through social media more than anything. What do you use more than anything? You, at least personally.
TikTok and Instagram, let's say.
TikTok. I do have some TikToks. I have a page. I don't like it. I don't even like Instagram, like the reels. I post YouTube shorts, and I also don't like YouTube shorts. I'll explain why, guys. Okay? It's good to consume. It's awful for your brain. Like, if you've ever noticed, at least for me, whenever I go on this little, scrolling, right? After about 10 to 15 minutes, man, my head just kind of hurts a little bit. And I'm like, what the? It feels like I'm in some weird kind of trance where I'm just like, scrolling. And I just refuse. I like watching YouTube long. That's really what I'm the most in. And X or Twitter, because it's just a good time. If you like having fun, as far as just watching people just eat each other from afar and just having popcorn, it's the best time. That's literally what Twitter is. Twitter right now is just people debating and bashing each other from all sides. And if you're a spectator, you're like, this is a show. This is crazy. But going back to your social media, that's what I really feel like TikTok and Instagram. The attention span is so short. It's like, and it feels like, how is that good for your brain?
The thing is, yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, I notice that with myself. I'm guilty of it. I catch myself scrolling for way too long, and I'm like, okay, I need to stop. I had to put time limits on myself because I don't like being on my phone that much. But I also don't want to go to the extreme of not using it, because I think TikTok also has a lot of benefits, and it has a lot of things that other platforms don't.
Like what?
For example,
right now.
A lot of people use it like Google now. Even I do. Really? Instead of looking for places to eat on Google, I usually look it up on TikTok. And this is something that I've seen a lot of people start doing because it comes from people. It's not from any... And I think we're also scared to get stuff from sources that are not valid or sources that are not...
Does your generation not trust Google?
I think we've grown less and less trusting of it. Not just Google, but any other sources except people themselves. You can tell who's speaking, what they look like, who they are, Are you
concerned at all? And sorry for cutting you off.
No, it's okay.
I really do like that whole thing that you said you use it for, it used to be Google for restaurants and stuff. I think that's crazy. Just, first of all, I just found that out, number one. And number two, I don't feel old, but goddamn, just stuff like that is very interesting to know. Now, do you see it as a problem that, and you know what I'm going to ask you right now, that TikTok is owned by China?
I think no, because if we use that same logic with all the stuff that's owned by China, and then also use it with all the other countries that, have issues, then what can you use? What can you do?
I mean, let me ask you this why, though. I'm going to tell you why. Do you believe the U.S. spies on other countries like China?
Yeah, probably.
Of course. Do you think they spy on us?
Yeah, but I don't see how specifically TikTok is worse than Instagram or Facebook or X or something else. Like, if it's not that, they're gonna find another way. So
No, I agree. The model itself, what you're talking about, when we're capitalism, is definitely going to be replicated itself. If they leave, somebody else will come take tech, whatever.
yeah, exactly. Like whatever it is, it's gonna happen.
I agree with that. But I think the concern is for most people in this country is that first of all, China is a communist country. I will never, at least from a person living in a communist country, ever advocate for communism. I just refuse. I just think China has become a communist country that its communist leaders understand the value of capitalism. So they've employed it, but at the same time, you don't get to speak, you don't get to do anything, we'll kill you otherwise, or just lock you up, And that's so dangerous that, at least for me, the thought of, and here it goes, the cynicism of being older, of having these people who are your enemies have so much data on you, of what your patterns are, how you're supposed to be thinking. The more data you gather, the more you can really understand, maybe not one individual person, but a collective, how they work, move, operate. And if you're telling me that the new generation is really using TikTok and doing stuff like that, which I didn't even know about, who's to say they're not studying you so they can fuck us up as well?
I mean, yeah, but I think also...
I'm sorry for my language. I'm bleeping on stuff.
It's fine. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, honestly, that I haven't read specifically on this topic because I know it's a big topic right now. Like, they're trying to ban TikTok. They're trying to do all of these things. But then also, the people that are trying to ban TikTok, I don't trust them. Like, you see the trials, and they're so ignorant. Like, they're talking
What trials are you alluding to?
The trial of the TikTok ban.
Okay.
There was a video that went viral on TikTok about like the senator or someplace talking to the owner of TikTok and kept repeating like, aren't you from Japan? And he's like, no, I'm from this place. And he's like, no, but you're from Japan.
He's from Singapore.
Yeah, Singapore. He's like, no, I'm from Singapore. Exactly. And it's like, how am I supposed to trust these leaders who supposedly know what's best for me when they can't even answer a simple question? Like, I don't...
But are you talking about the TikTok execs? Or are you talking about the senators?
No, the senators.
In what sense?
Because if you're trying to... I see a conversation where the TikTok executive is like, sir, like, what are you asking? Like, I'm from Singapore. I'm not from China. And he's like, no, but you are. You are from China. And he's like, no, I'm not, I don't trust either side. Like, yes, the TikTok has so much information on me that it's scary. But at the same time, what is this person going to do with that? Like, I don't trust them either.
Well, it becomes more of, I guess, what we spoke about earlier. It's like, who are you going to trust? The person who ultimately wants to kill you and destroy this country or take you over, Or the people who, these guys are, obviously corrupt. I mean, and that's what I think the American public is really, really starting to realize. It don't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican. These guys at the top, they're all playing game.
Yeah.
They'll on the back, they're friends, man. They're friends. It's the truth, And so I get that, but at the same time, they live here, and they don't want to be killed and, taken over. So it's like, at the same time, I also see if you're receiving that message from TikTok, then TikTok also took the context to also favor them, because we really live in a society right now of out of context information. Everybody has context to the part that they want to hear, We see a story, most people are not going to take the 10 to 20 minutes it takes to actually get from the beginning to the end of a story. They'll just find a clip from somebody who they like or trust to regurgitate it, and then that will become their solid positioning without any context. So that's why the TikTok thing is interesting, that, how useful it is for you guys. Apart from that, what else do you use it for, other than restaurants?
There's so many things. That's the thing. It's a whole world. And like, thinking about your point, I hadn't thought about it like that, which I think is interesting. It is dangerous, but at the same time, in my lifestyle, it's so helpful. Like, there's educational videos on there,
And Grant, I don't trust Google either.
Yeah.
I know for a fact Google sells everything.
And that's what I'm saying
Facebook
also.
sells
like
everything.
If TikTok,
but it's like, at least let me not say another word. At least these guys are from our home turf. Yeah, we hate these people playing our team, but they're in our team. They live here. Mm-hmm. You know, the other team does not live here, and they don't care if we die or live. Actually, they wish they could take us over, you know, because they also see us as a threat. Whenever you see somebody else as a threat, they also see you as a threat. You know, so I'd rather feel threatened at home than abroad. I don't know.
Two things. Let me finish about the benefits because I think there's a lot. One, for creators, I think it's so much easier to blow up on TikTok than anywhere else. It's given platform to so many people that wouldn't ever, and in a good way. Obviously in some bad ways too, but I've seen a lot of people there that are just very influential, in not just like influencers of like, you know, beauty or whatever. It's people who bring new ideas into the world that would otherwise not be able to share them, you know? And I've educated myself on there about, you know, like, I don't know, even sign language. Like, I love sign language. I love learning sign language. I don't know where else except apps, but like, they're not really that helpful. I could learn about things like that.
It's become more like an ecosystem for you to just get information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily political information because obviously I don't trust that anywhere, but it's just information of anything. Like if you look up, I don't know, or even people with like, I love psychology, right? And I love learning about it. And a lot of the times we don't understand a lot of psychological illnesses. And I've learned a lot from people who have these illnesses who speak about it on TikTok, you know, like just from ADHD to BPD, which is, that could be bipolar disorder or just like personality disorders. Like these are people that you wouldn't necessarily meet on your everyday basis, but like they talk about their experiences on TikTok. And it's interesting because then when I do encounter somebody who has those things, I know a little bit more about them, you know? Or even, I don't know, like songs. Like it's also really helpful for artists who are trying to put out songs because the same sounds get used over and over and over again. And so a lot of songs have gotten famous because of these things.
You just need one of the big guys to play it.
And a lot of small artists have become big artists because of that. And their music is great and would otherwise not have a platform because of it. You know, like there's so many small things, I think, that TikTok
but again, we go back to that, you know, if in reality, like we said, if we got rid of TikTok or whatever, its alternative will pop up, right? Don't you think that people just migrate over?
Yeah, but I feel like it would take a long time to build up to what it is now.
I would even give you this favor. I think obviously if it was in this country, it would become more political. You know, because all social media right now in the US is political.
Yeah.
Like you can't get away from it.
That's the other thing. TikTok is very...
The Chinese don't want you talking politics.
And it's nice. It feels nice.
They want you to be distracted somewhere else.
Like Instagram Reels is not the same as TikTok. I don't love Instagram Reels.
That's what I'm saying. Like, is that a good thing or not?
Well, in a short term, it is. And that's what I'm saying. Like to your point about like the safety of how it works, I can't speak on that because I don't know exactly all the technicalities of it. But I'm saying in my experience for like selfishly for me, it's so nice to have a platform where like you can just scroll about things that you like and that you enjoy and that, you know, you can find anything on there. Instead of Instagram where like there's also a filter on there of like, you have to post aesthetic pictures, you have to do this, you have to do that.
Yeah, now you can be uglier in TikTok in the sense of,
like
let me
no
just
one
be mean.
cares.
I get what you're saying.
The more authentic you are, the better, you know? And on Instagram, like it's starting to become a little bit more like that, like with photo dumps. I don't know if you know what that is. Like basically...
Man, I am an old man on social media.
Basically,
other than YouTube, I am on YouTube. Man, when I say I've always wanted to be a YouTuber, I've always wanted to because I just love YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I don't trust YouTube. I don't trust Google. That's the truth. Mm-hmm. But I think the way they set it up, especially for the longs, you know, it's so good.
YouTube has been around since...
You can actually like listen to somebody, and I'm a very talkative person. I love listening to people's like raw, real opinion.
And see, now TikTok has an option to do it for 10 minutes. So even though it's not as like long as YouTube, there are things that, you know, like there's podcasts on there. There's full-on podcasts on there that people listen to.
But it's different because when you go on the YouTube app, I've noticed they're adapting a little bit. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it's always been they promote more of the longs, and then every once in a while you get a short. As opposed to TikTok is the other way
Yeah,
around.
because that's their thing.
Correct. TikTok is still like a very, very heavy and short video, and then very,
that's
very
the
small
whole purpose. Like, there's also a reason why YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, even Netflix has adopted what TikTok has.
100%. You get more viewership, and you also get them more drugged. That's what I'm saying. I feel drugged when I'm on those. That's like I can't. This is
No,
like a
that
drug.
is true. That is true. I put time limits on myself because I catch myself like, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. But that's something that I recognize, and I'm like, okay, 30 minutes a day, like max, And yeah, sometimes I skip like the 15-minute thing, but like I try not to do it, and I try not to let it go past like, a certain amount of time.
Do you think that's also like just with technology? Everything's evolving so fast. I really do question myself. Within the next 15, 20 years, are we gonna be so dependent on technology that we'll even adapt, like being incorporated with AI? I'm not talking about like sci-fi, like maybe 120 years where we're like 300 years where we're like half robot, half human, whatever. I'm really saying more like, for example, Neuralink, which has been going, I don't know if you've seen it. So Elon Musk company, Neuralink, created a device that you can implant in your brain. Right? There's already somebody, they did it with trials of monkeys, succeeded. There's already a guy who's handicapped, quadriplegic, and he has an implant in his brain, and he can use his phone, he can use a computer, he plays video games, he tweets. He already tweeted like the other day, like a week ago. He's literally doing it with his brain, just thinking, right? And that's what I'm saying. I feel like sometimes, especially the younger generation, where you're such in a hurry to prove yourself that you dive too deep into something. And especially your generation, I've heard a lot of, and maybe it's just like the media setting it up this way. This is like the most tolerant group of people, like they're accepting of everybody. But don't you think too much tolerance is also a bad thing?
In what way?
Yeah. When you're so good that you don't recognize there's evil penetrates, infiltrates, and eventually takes over.
I feel like it's also underestimating, though, that we do acknowledge the bad stuff too. Like tolerance and like a social tolerance of like I accept you, you accept me, or tolerance as in like you let anything fly by. Because there's also a difference between that, I think.
No, I think it's not anything let fly by, or else you wouldn't have like discussions and arguments with everybody else. I'm saying more towards your own group. That game that really, I guess your age, I call it a game. For you guys, not a game. So sorry, I apologize for that. But I'm saying that style of the pronouns, if we want to get even crazier, your generation has a big problem with gender, and when I say a problem, it's that it hasn't defined what the hell it wants to do. A lot of your generation is fighting more. Well, this person wants to be transsexual, sure. This person wants to feel like a boy and he's a girl, sure. But most people are like, wait, what the hell? What are you talking about? This is never being an issue. How come now it's so prevalent?
Never when, because it's been a thing for a while.
When I say never, I'm saying it hasn't been on the list of priorities up here. It's always been down here. Because throughout humanity, we've had nothing. I go back to the living in a communist country. When you don't have crap, society's like social problems fall to the bottom. You're just trying to survive. Everything else doesn't matter. So, but when you get to this point, you become so tolerant within your own group. You want to be so accepting of people that have a similar ideology that you're also setting yourself up to fail, because there's always going to be bad actors, no matter what. And that's really what I want to get to. Do you think that's something that's a phase? I don't want to say like a phase like, I had the summer thing. I'm saying a phase by generation. Or do you think the gender, like the gender, I don't want to say politics, the gender awakening is here to stay forever?
I think there are phases of where liberalism, I don't know if it's a word, but liberalism comes into play, you know, like in the 60s, like people were a lot more liberal with drugs in that sense, you know? I'm sure that they ask themselves the same question, like, are teenagers always going to be this crazy with drugs in that sense? I think that, yes, right now, maybe we're talking more about it than we ever will, but I don't think that it's going to go away. I think that these are things that for a lot of people, it comes innately, like, they've known they don't feel the gender they are since they're born, you know? So it's the same thing as you were saying about like your gay cousin, like he's known.
Uncle.
Or sorry, uncle. Your gay uncle, since he's born, he knew, you know? Or like everybody around him knew. Like I've met transgender people. I've seen it. Like I understand their perspective. Like you said, I think some people also go through a process where they're experimenting with it and maybe they decide at the end of the day like this is not what I wanted, but that doesn't mean that they're also doing it on purpose, you know? Like I don't think anybody chooses to go through a gender change or go through this process of like changing or choosing your sexuality, considering how a lot of the times badly they're treated. I don't think they do it for other people. They're trying to figure themselves out. I don't think they do it to like.
No, I really don't think the problem with the transgender community, it really didn't pick up until it started infiltrating into, well, are we treating a transgender person as a sex we're aligning with 100%, or just on some things, and some things we need to be realistic? And I'll give you this example in sports, you know, obviously, and I will say this. If I was born a man and I transitioned to a woman and I want to be a woman, I'm 100% convinced. I've been like this since I was born. You can tell. It's okay to respect that person, 100%. But we can't ignore realities that a man is always going to be stronger than a woman because it's literally biology. Testosterone is a freaking crazy drug. You know, we're to the point where we've seen the majority of problems we've had with suicidal, especially in the transgender community. We've seen it with women trying to transition into men and using testosterone. Testosterone makes you crazy. You don't know what you're doing. You know, we've seen this clinically. You know, so, and we haven't seen women transitioning to men bothering sports for men, you know, physical stuff. We haven't, because men are naturally born. So we go back to that. How do you treat somebody that thinks they're supposed to be this thing? But we all know 100% you can't be this thing because you weren't born it. Unfortunately, that's the reality.
I think with sports, it's a hard topic because
it's not hard if it's true.
Yeah, but I'm saying hard in the sense of how you treat the person themselves when if we as a society choose like, okay, we're not letting transgender people play sports that are not in their like born gender. That can be a decision, but then how are you doing that? Because there's a way to do that, you know, like you don't have to bully the person to do so. And that's what I mean. We're not saying bullying. No, I know. I'm not saying you, or I'm not saying that that's the case for a lot of people, but I'm saying like it happens to be that like the way that they treat them a lot of the time is bullying. Like when it's not just telling them like, hey, like you are literally built different. Like there's things that you just can't do, you know? It's not like that. It's you're a woman, like you're supposed to be a woman, like like it's a more aggressive way to do it. Does that make sense? Like there's ways to set those ground rules as a society, and I think that because people feel so strongly about it, they don't know how to do that. Like it's just a very
we go back to the beginning where it's that ambiguity is a problem when any side is trying to actually come together.
What I'm saying is it's fine if
we have to define what exactly we want to do. We have to define exactly what's going on, so then we can actually set clear roles. So if we know 100%, okay, without a question or doubt, that if you're born a man and you transition to a woman, you have an unfair advantage over a woman, regardless, then the conversation should be out that transgender women should participate in women's sports.
But then it also depends, like if you think about a man who is like, you know, skinny and like relatively scrawny, and you put them against a woman who's gone to the gym their whole life.
That's been me my whole life.
Exactly.
I was different. 65 pounds at 11, and I could be a woman 130, 140 pounds wrestling. You know, my kids themselves, when I literally say testosterone, and it's literally because we're the same. And when we're, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but when we're conceived as humans, right? For the most part, we're the same. Up until that little gene, a little chromosome that defines how everything's going to come. But we're literally the same thing. And those hormones is what determines how we get literally created formed. So it's not by choice. We don't have a choice if you're a woman or a man. You literally don't have a choice. That's the one thing you have no choice over in this world. Who your mother is, who your father is, and where you're born as. You have no choice. So I go back to that same thing. So if we know if it's an unfair advantage, how is it fair to the people like a woman who then now you've taken their chance away, their opportunity away? Because that's the truth. So I go back to the same thing. It's a very, very important to define things how it is, so then we can have a real discussion of how to help the problem. So if we know this, how do we then give transgender the actual platform so people can still support them, but at the same time be fair? Why can't we make a transgender league? Why is that a problem? Why do we have to replace spots that people, who have worked very, very hard don't have a fair advantage? They don't have an advantage. Why can't we do that? So everybody wins. And that's where, again, we go back to the beginning of the conversation with the pronoun game. If there's not a compromise, there will never be a solution. It's always going to be, you said this, I believe this, you believe that. It doesn't matter. You're ignorant. I'm ignorant. You're ignorant. We're both ignorant. We're both dumb.
I do think that a compromise is important. And I think specifically in sports, I don't know if it'll ever come to a place where we choose one extreme.
Not just sports, the military, jobs. Women don't do physical hard labor jobs. I can tell you this from being a company owner and part of a company that employs over 300 employees. It's mostly women. Women nowadays, and I'm the first one. I've hired more women in my life than men by 10 times. Because women nowadays have become so good at doing the jobs that men hate doing, which is really being executive stuck in an office and commanding from this. Women are so good at that. Because they don't mind, women are very intellectual. They don't mind working hard, And you guys finally have, in my opinion, at least in this country, you can do whatever the hell you want, whenever you want. So then why the hell are we, after we've empowered women to this point, why are we hurting them with men? I mean, literally.
And this also, I feel like, is a good point to where you were saying of there's also bigger conversations as to women's rights in this country. I don't
know if asking you this question is appropriate, at least for your age group. I mean, do you care if you answer? I mean, because I'll answer it. That way you don't have to. I think the biggest question that I've seen, on any side from your generation have trouble answering, and it's because of this. Again, I go back to game because I see it from that perspective, but the rules you've been given for your age, which is I feel like your age can't answer what the hell is a woman. What is a woman? Every time they ask it, they go into well, a woman is whoever identifies as a woman. And because we go back to the same thing with the transgender people, which again, I have no problem with. You get to live your life how you want to. Please be happy. We want you to be. But if you can't answer that question, then we can't have a conversation about whether women, are being treated fairly or not, because we're just not addressing the real problems.
Well, I think there is a conversation to be had regardless of what you or I decide to be the definition of a woman, because in the street, whatever you see as a woman is going to be a woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah, claro.
You're not going to ask them and just be like, oh, but you're a woman, right? It's however you perceive them. And I think that that's a problem. It's how do we treat who we perceive as women? That's, I think, a conversation that we can still have without the other discussion.
But again, we go back to the same thing. I feel like the first The whole problem is it comes from empathy, from being tolerant from your own circle and group. You know, you want to be so nice that you're literally not addressing a real thing. That a woman is somebody who was born biological woman, whether you want to be or not. And it's not about I'm not going to treat you like a woman. You are a transgender person and you identify as a woman. I'm going to treat you like a woman.
And that's the thing. So then you are a woman. Like if you're going to treat me the same.
Yes, but I'm not going to acknowledge that you're a real woman. It's not true. And I wouldn't be your real friend, and you wouldn't really be my real friend if we both can agree on that.
But what I'm saying is, like, if a transgender person didn't tell you that they were a woman, and you treated them like a woman, then essentially you're accepting that they're a woman. You know what I'm saying? Like the only difference.
Yeah, I'm not saying I wouldn't treat them as a woman. I'm saying their definition is not a woman. They're not a real woman defined by what a woman actually is. I would treat them as a woman because that's what I perceive reality. You know, they act like a woman. Like I said, if you've been like this your whole life, I'm not gonna treat you any other. That's what you want to do, man. Live a happy life. I'm not gonna treat you any different. But I can't, ignore reality that you're not a real woman. You're not a real woman. And if we're actually friends, you won't even care about that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if we can't identify that,
but I think it goes back to the same thing we agreed on for the pronouns. Like, if a transgender person is friends with somebody who doesn't agree with them, then just don't be friends with them. Like, I think it's going to be a point where it's just, if you don't agree with somebody, then just don't, be around them. Like, yes, there's a point where we had to agree as a society, but I think that's something that we can agree on. Like, if we don't agree on the same views, then we can have relationships in different ways, right? Like, we don't have to. I agree with that.
Okay. Exactly. I like that.
So I think that that's something, that's the solution that's closest.
But then again, if we're real friends, then I can always use those things as a joke.
If the person is okay with it, yeah. Right? Like,
at least for me, if I'm a friend with somebody, I don't mind if they hit my weak points, because I know they love me and they're just doing it to mess with me. But
see, that's also, this is the same thing with relationships and friendships. It's if you have the same boundaries. Like, if my boundaries are the same as yours, that's perfectly fine. If they're not, then we shouldn't be friends. You know what I mean?
I agree.
So I think that's something that is just the closest solution.
But again, I say this from almost like a captain of a spaceship, seeing where I used to be. In 5 years, we'll see what how your opinion changes. Whether it leans more one way, leans more other way, or it just does a complete 180. I really feel that part of the reason, you have this viewpoint, because you still haven't got to the point where now you're by yourself and you don't get influenced by everybody in your circle, which is something that happens just for growing up. Once you finally have to work, in the sense of, now I don't have to go to school anymore. Now I can actually dedicate my time to what I want to invest my time into. You start realizing, wait, why was I so upset about this? Why did this intrigue me so much?
But see, also, I think that it's not fair to generalize a whole generation.
And it doesn't come from a condescending place. It comes just...
I get what you're saying, but there's also a lot of people that I know that are not even going to school anymore. They have full-time jobs, and, they already have that life. And yes, your perspective is going to change as you grow up. That's a given. It's, you mature, you go through different things in life. But that doesn't mean that my perspective now, or our generation's perspective now, is not valid because we haven't lived as long as
not even close. I disagree. And I actually think the most valuable part of your generation is telling us where we should be looking, because we're not. And that's a very clear evident by just even the TikTok thing. I'm still in amazement, by the way. Because again, once you settle into, I guess, the rhythm of, of just doing something, you kind of stop, listening to what everybody else is doing, and it happens to every generation. And
the other thing is that Gen Zs are already in the workforce. It's not 15-year-olds anymore. 15-year-olds are already closer to Gen Alpha. Gen Zs are already 27, I think, max.
Yeah.
I mean, they're around
have
my
you seen
sister's
Gen
age.
Z had a problem like finding employment?
No.
No.
I think it's more the opposite. I think employers have found it hard to hire Gen Z people because we are more leaning towards making our own businesses and all of that, which is a good and a bad thing because obviously everyone needs employees and, you know, you need to work for somebody to be able to have your own business. But yeah,
I mean,
I think
let me ask you this then.
Mm-hmm.
This is an interesting question. You know, because part of the reason why I love working in Miami as an employer, there's never a lack of employees. We have such a constant wave of immigrants. And especially since this market is so Spanish dominated, you know, it's literally plug and play. You know, how do you feel about the like immigration? Do you think that affects your chances of getting a good job?
honestly, I don't see it that way. I think that
But
as
do you
an
think
immigrant,
it can hurt somebody in that sense?
somebody, yeah. For me, I don't think that that's the case. I think that I see why people could see it that way because there's more competition, right? Like the more people that come, more people that you have to compete with. And also a lot of the times are people that can make it out of the countries, which means that not always, because obviously like there's people that have to walk here. But a lot of the times it's people
Or
that
walk, fly.
yeah, whatever.
I'm always
Like,
gonna be impartial to immigration, guys.
I'm saying,
I
like-
want to, but it's impossible. I'm an immigrant myself.
yeah, I'm saying like it's very hard to come here, and there's a lot of people that, you know, it's not easy for them. But for a lot of people too, it's the people that are educated, it's the people that can make it out of the countries, that have money to make it out of those countries. So yes, they're educated, they're gonna come and, you know, they're gonna find jobs. But I don't think that, I think there's still a lot of jobs to fill. I don't think that like because of immigration we're not gonna find jobs. I feel like
Well, I mean, it
there's
might have the
other
opposite
reasons.
effect, like you said. You know, I do see Gen Z having a lot of jobs in the influential like markets, like social media, investments. You know, I think that's maybe like that type of effect where since you guys are so vocal, you know, this is how I feel. You know, whereas opposed to my generation still is like, this is how I feel, but I want to get fired. You know.
Yeah.
And I feel like your generation is so much more vocal that employers are like, I don't want to deal with this. You know, that's the truth.
And I don't want to deal with an employer also who doesn't want to deal with that. You know
So
what I mean?
if you become that, then, but it's always like a weird thing in America where it's like everything's so intertwined that you can never have a true enemy anywhere. You know, it's like you want to say you're tolerant, this and that, and capitalism is bad, but at the same time, you're benefiting from capitalism. I want to say that, you know, capitalism is great, but at the same time, I don't like you being a capitalist because then you compete with me. You know what I'm saying? It's that thing where we all kind of like, we're all hypocrites, you know, but we believe we're like nice hypocrites, you know? I don't know if that rings true to you or not, but that's what it always feels like. You know, but yeah, anything else you want to touch on? I mean, I really appreciate, you know, the perspective and the view you've given, because, you know, I've kind of shied away from the younger generation. You know, I have a sister, she's 17, but at this point, she doesn't want to listen to me. You know, she doesn't want to hear from me. She's in that age, you know, but at the same time, you know, I'm already a father. You know, I'm doing my own thing, so it's hard for me to connect with your generation right now. So I really thank you. Any other advice you want to give me other than
Yeah, I think
TikTok is Google?
I think that that I actually mentioned it in one of the topics I wanted to talk about is the fact that I feel like as a generation, just not even as a generation itself, but like as young people, we're misunderstood, not in the sense of like what we were talking about just now, but in communication wise. Like, I think that we're also a lot more exposed to psychology terms, right? Like in our slang, there's a lot of psychology, like medical terms that are just part of our everyday conversation.
Like what? Give me an
Like
example.
love language, for example. Do you know what that is?
Love language?
Uh-huh.
It sounds like sex, but
No. So love language is basically a theory, a psychological theory. And there's 5. There's physical touch. There is quality time, words of affirmation, gift giving, and I forgot the other one. But well, whatever. There's another one. And we use a lot of these terms to communicate with each other and, be able to create friendships that are just a lot more open and like communicative, if that makes sense. And I think that it's hard talking to older people, even just like 10 years older, who don't understand these terms or have never been exposed to these things or educated on psychological topics, because they're just like, oh, you're too dramatic, or like you're too like Gen Z, like whatever, like it's kind of waved off. But like these things really do help to build stronger connections. And I think even with your sister, like it could help to talk about these things, because I think that when you talk about like love languages like that, like mine is physical touch, right? Like I'm very like affectionate. Like that's how I express myself. Other people, like if I'm friends with someone who isn't, I can easily interpret that as like, oh, you don't love me. Like, oh, you don't care about me, And I think a lot of these generations, like even with my parents, I feel like it's happened that I'm like, I have learned to read their ways of expression and understand that it's different from them, Like my dad is not very expressive or like, physical touch, but he expresses his love in a different way. And
I'm actually not like that. I'm very affectionate with my kids.
Exactly. Like you could be that way, but maybe your kid grows up to not be affectionate and you're like, oh, he doesn't love me, So you have to understand these things as an adult dealing with children. Not just like the love language thing, but just like the way that we've learned to communicate our feelings is valid and it's important for other people to understand that as well. Because it's just such a better way to communicate. Like I don't see how not talking about your feelings can be a good thing.
I agree. I would agree with that point. I think the disconnect is more than anything is that, once you get to a certain place, like you stop caring about, having to update the way you think.
Exactly. And that in itself is a problem because then, you stop caring about those relationships in a way. Like if you're not putting in the effort,
it's tough because
hard.
Again, most people nowadays, at least for me, I think we're working more than ever.
Yeah,
everybody's working. It feels like everybody's working all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, man, it's like you don't turn off ever. Whether you're working or you're on social media, it's like you never disconnect really.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to like before this technological boom in the last 20 years, people really got to go more out, interact more in the community. It didn't really feel like this. This feels like connected but separated all at the same time. So that's why I really feel like it's where it's like, bro, can we just like chill out? Like, why do I have to like keep calling you this or now that? That's where that feeling comes from.
Yeah, and it is hard. Like I think keeping any relationship is hard, like friendship, family wise, whatever. But I think it's important to be updated on these things, like especially like as a parent. And I always try to put myself in the perspective of a child. Like we all have, and another term is inner child. Do you know what that is?
Inner child?
Mm-hmm.
I guess. Yeah, like the happy you. I don't know. I would never frolic around. I don't know.
And that's the thing. Like these terms are something that anyone or most people my age would understand. Like these are things that we all talk about. We've all learned about on our own, not even in school. Like we just are interested about it.
Do you think that's programmed or that happens organically?
I think we've just like learned to communicate better and we see that it works and that it's interesting to us. I don't think that it's part of like the system or thing because if anything, I don't think that it's good for us for the system to communicate better. I think it's better.
I'm gonna give you like what I call a raw take, which is, and I'm a nerd. I grew up a nerd. Like I was the best student always in my class. That just sounds like very nerdy stuff. Like, like the club. I used to be part of those clubs, the music club, and again, this is from my perspective and up. And I think that's why I want to talk about it because the disconnect exists. For us, it's just like, okay, guys, I get what you're saying, but you're taking it to a point where now it bothers me.
But why does it bother you?
Because I just want to be left alone. And you want to be left alone, but when we interact, you want me to treat you how you want me to treat you.
It's not about me forcing you to treat me a certain way. It's about, like I said, like when you're treating your kids, right? Like I always, whenever I deal with a kid or like even with anyone really, you think about these terms like inner child. Like everyone has an inner child. Everyone has the age that you've been in, like your 1-year-old self, your 2-year-old self, your 3-year-old self, like every age that you've been in is inside of you, right? So when you have certain reactions, like if something happens to you now that triggers how you felt when you were 6 and your dad said something to you or your mom or whatever, like it's a trauma that you've had, you're going to react that's a similar way. It's common. It's not always, but like it's, for example, if you've always been called ugly your whole life since you were little and someone calls you ugly as an adult, it's going to hurt you more because it's a thing that your inner child hasn't healed, right? And
it depends.
If you haven't
if I'm
healed
convinced I'm ugly, who cares?
That's what I'm saying. Like it's something that you've learned since you're a child, and it's a wound, right? If it's something that you haven't healed, and this is just an example, like you can use this for whatever, but if it's something you haven't healed when you're older and someone triggers that, that's your 6-year-old coming out and feeling bad about it. Obviously, you're not going to act like an actual 6-year-old child, but your emotions are going to be coming from that same place. And so when you understand that, especially when you parent, it's so helpful because you're understanding how you're affecting your kids throughout their life, you know? I'm not saying to be like permissive or to say like, you know, yes to everything. I'm just saying come from a place of you're a 6-year-old in the world. This is your first time experiencing everything. You know, when someone says no, it's the end of the world for you. That's how you need to treat everybody. You know, like you need to understand where they're coming from and where their like perspective is. And to them, it may be the end of the world. And it's tiring to think about it like that, but it's so helpful when dealing with people who are complicated, because a lot of the times it comes from places where their inner child is hurt or they've gone through something that has completely nothing to do with you. It's not personal. It's just
there's a lot to unpack there.
Coming from another place, and you need to be considerate of that.
So I'll agree with you. You know, I think for the most part, we should definitely, especially with kids, treat them with respect in the sense of, you know, we want them to start forming. And I see this with my sons. My son is 6, another one's almost 4, and I have a 1.5-year-old daughter. So the 6, he has that. He's trying to really decide who he wants to be, what he's confident with, what he's not. But they're also kids, and I can tell you this from my perspective, both as a kid and a father, they don't know what the hell they're doing. You know, so even though you're trying to give them the confidence, you know, to start solidifying values, you know, what you're supposed to control or not, at the same time, you know, they're going to make really, really big mistakes because they just don't know any better. You know, and that's where I go back to the whole tolerance thing. When you're so tolerant with what you want to make sure is compassionate, you also make a lot of mistakes. You know, you have no choice but to make mistakes. But because you haven't hardened enough. You're still in like kind of like formative. If we're talking about formation, you're starting a little, even at your age, and I don't want to disrespect with this, even at your age, you're still in like the soft shell of the egg. The more time passes by, you harden because you understand emotions. And as a salesperson, I'll tell you this, it's the best way to sell. If I can get you to be emotional, you'll buy. Because every salesperson knows this. Logic is only used to know if I'm somebody trustworthy or not. But emotions are used to trigger the person, to get them where I want to be, to give them or have them take from me what I want to give. And so when you're so emotional about everything in the sense of like respect and this and that, it's inevitable that you're going to rub shoulders the wrong way, and it's going to seem more tyrannical in the sense of you need to do what I tell you, other than that inclusive or like we just want to be respectful for everybody else. And I think time will tell, and I really do hopefully I'm wrong, but I think within the next 5 or 10 years, you'll be like, I get what you're saying. I now see what you're saying. I want to be respectful of my friends that believe this way, but at the same time, I'm not going to get insulted if somebody doesn't respect that.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think you have to be permissive with either children or your friends or anybody to still be respectful. Like, I think you can still be like, have your own values, have your own beliefs, and be strong to that, and have that, like you said, strong shell, and hold yourself to that without wavering that, and still put yourself in the position of somebody else. Like if you want to use the sales pitch as an example, or the sales example, if someone's yelling at you and you're still trying to sell it to them, you're not going to treat them different. I mean, you're going to treat them differently as if they were in a good mood. Like, you're going to understand their context. You're going to understand how are they feeling.
No, but if somebody's in that sense, nobody's buying or selling anything.
Exactly. So you need to have a place where you can have a normal conversation, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like,
by anger, I'm not talking about anger as an emotion. And I think that kind of goes away. I'm talking about empathy as an emotion, how easily it is to control and manipulate. Because when we truly care about something, right, we tend to lose logic. We tend to forget for a second that even though this person is giving us this, what are that person's real intentions? Why are they giving us this? How are they benefiting from it? And that's why I go back to the same thing. You'll never really be able to connect with other people until what's important to you, correct, is not an issue if that other person is not important to them. You also don't have to care about what they care about. You can care about stuff that you have in common. But if they don't want to call you a she, he, they, whatever, and that's important to you, who cares? I care about making sure we have a huge wall. Again, I don't care about this at the end of the day. But I'm giving an example, right? And if you don't care about that, you're an enemy. Why? Why does it matter? And I think that's literally the issue and the problem. If we can just understand that, we'll never have an issue. Who cares? Live your happy life. Let me live my happy life. And at the end of the day, the real enemy is ourselves. Working with ourselves. We literally can't blame anybody else for what we failed to do.
That's true.
For what we failed to accomplish. So our biggest enemy at the end of the day, when you wake up, when you go to sleep, when you look in the mirror, is, am I satisfied with the person I've become? Am I satisfied with the person I'm working to become? Especially at your age. I hated being at your age. I have no power, no money, didn't know what the hell I want, but at least I knew what I wanted to work forward to become. And when I really started to understand that I'm my own worst enemy, the rest of the world stopped moving to me. It didn't matter. You want to call me Juanito, Blanquito, you want to call me short, this and that, flaquito, too much energy, no problem. I found people who love me. I've created something that works. The rest doesn't matter. And when you call me that, guess what? We're going to do the same thing as what Cubans do, which is what Cubans will call, black Cubans will call white Cubans negros, which means black. And the white Cubans will call the black Cubans rubio, which means blondie. Because it doesn't matter. It's about love. And true love doesn't care about differences. It cares about making sure we have stuff that we can come in the middle and elevate that.
And yeah, I agree with what you were saying of not caring about what other people think. I think that's an important thing, and I think we're established that. I was just more saying of how you treat the people in your life that you do care about and that you do.
Oh, I agree.
Fundamentally, that you do love 100%. And want to make sure that they know that you love them. That's where I'm saying that I think feelings matter and that you have to care what they think. In other ways, I don't think that a random person's opinion matters, or even someone who you don't value. If you don't value their opinion, it's for a reason, And I don't think there's a lot of people whose opinion you should value. But I think there's a few who I think you need to nurture. And I think that a lot of people don't understand. Does that make sense?
Well said.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to wrap here. Wow, we've talked about a lot. I will say this. I'm happy that we can have these discussions. Number one, because I learn a lot. I also think it's important to put real definitions to real problems. Because again, once we just leave dead air and just ambiguity, in my opinion, that's when people really start to get away. If you have any friends or anybody who completely disagrees with me, I'm always happy to talk to that type of person. Because even here, a lot of things, you're not going to agree with what I said, but I think there's some things that are going to resonate with you and might add value. And there's also things that have resonated with me, with you, that will add value. So, nothing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Make sure Just leave me your comments, subscribe. I'm going to leave here her social media so you guys can follow. And if you do follow her, said Lewis sent you. All right? Thank you guys. Have a good one.